My wife's old tablet buzzed on the 5th afternoon after the twins were born, while I was folding 2 baby blankets in the nursery I had painted with my own hands. Marla was still at the hospital with the boys. They had arrived early, and the doctors wanted to keep all 3 of them for a few extra days. She was supposed to come home the next morning. That was what I believed I was preparing for. A homecoming. A family. The miracle we had waited 10 years to hold. The tablet sat on the dresser beside a stack of diapers and 2 tiny blue hats. I almost ignored it. Then I saw my brother Felix's name flash across the screen. The message said, "He signed the hospital forms, right? Good. The longer he believes they're his, the harder it gets for him to walk away." I stood there with 1 blanket half folded in my hands, staring at the words, like my brain had forgotten how to read. Before I could move, another message came in. "Relax. Adrian won't see it. Vivienne might, but she knows better than to start talking now. My name is Adrian Bell. I was 43 years old when I found out that the family I had prayed for was not mine at all. I worked as an insurance fraud investigator in Pittsburgh. My whole job was finding the little cracks in a story, a date that did not match, a payment that made no sense, a person who smiled too much when they thought nobody was checking. I trusted evidence for a living. I just never thought I would need that skill in my own nursery. I took a picture of the screen with my phone. Then I placed the tablet back exactly where it had been. The nursery smelled like fresh paint and baby detergent. 2 cribs sat against the wall. 2 small name plaques hung above them. Marla had chosen the names before I ever saw the ultrasound clearly. I thought she was just excited. I thought motherhood had finally softened the pain in her. Standing there, I understood something colder. She had not been sharing a miracle with me. She had been managing me. So I sat on the nursery floor between those 2 empty cribs, opened my laptop, and created a private folder called House Claim. That was the moment I stopped waiting for my wife to come home. I started preparing for the truth to arrive first. Marla and I had been married for 12 years. For 10 of those years, we had tried to have a child. At first, trying felt sweet, hopeful. We talked about names in bed. We pointed out little houses with big yards and said things like, "That would be a good place to raise kids." Then time passed. 1 year became 2. 2 became 5. Hope turned into appointments, blood tests, bills, and quiet car rides home from clinics where neither of us knew what to say. Every month had the same ritual. Marla would buy a pregnancy test. She would disappear into the bathroom. I would stand in the hallway pretending not to listen to the tiny sounds behind the door. Then she would come out with red eyes. "I'm sorry," she would whisper. And every time I would hold her and say, "Don't apologize for something we're facing together." I meant it. For years I believed our pain belonged to both of us. But somewhere along the way, Marla stopped hearing that as comfort. She started hearing it as weakness. She stopped saying we. She started saying, "I just want to be a mother." At first I told myself grief does strange things to people. Then she began looking at me like I was not grieving the right way. Like my calm was an insult. Like every steady breath I took proved I did not want a child badly enough. I blamed myself in silence. I paid for every treatment we could afford. I went to every appointment she let me attend. When she wanted to pray, I prayed with her, even though faith had always come easier to her than it did to me. When she wanted to try another clinic, I drove. When she cried at baby showers, I made excuses and took her home. Felix started showing up during those years. He was my younger brother by adoption. My parents took him in when he was a baby, and I grew up protecting him like it was my second job. Felix was charming in the way careless men often are. People forgave him before he even finished apologizing. He had debt, he had excuses, he had a way of making every disaster sound like bad luck. I was the steady one. He was the one everyone rescued. That had always bothered him more than he admitted. At first I thought he was being kind to Marla. He brought soup after one of her procedures. He sent flowers after a failed round. He checked in when I was at work. Then his kindness started to feel too comfortable. At family dinners, he sat too close to her. He laughed too hard at things she said. Once, while Marla was helping Vivienne, her mother, clear plates in the kitchen, Felix leaned toward me and said, "Some people don't know what they have until they lose it." I thought he was talking about life. Now I know he was warning me. Marla's mother, Vivienne, was always polite to me. Polished, old school, careful with her words. She had the kind of house where even the throw pillows looked like they had rules. She liked me well enough. I could feel that. But there was always distance. When Marla announced she was pregnant after 10 years, I cried harder than she did. She held up the test in our bathroom doorway, both hands shaking, and said, "Adrian, it happened." I remember grabbing the sink because my knees went weak. For one night, everything in our house changed. We laughed, we cried. I held her stomach even though there was nothing to feel yet. I let myself imagine school lunches, little shoes by the door, birthday candles, fingerprints on windows. Then the details started to shift. Marla did not want me at the first ultrasound. "I want to surprise you with the pictures," she said. I believed her. Then appointment times changed without warning. Calendar reminders disappeared. She started saying the clinic had called her directly. When I asked simple questions, she acted like I was adding stress. "You investigate people all day," she snapped once. "Can you not do that to me?" That sentence stayed with me. Felix became bolder during the pregnancy. He brought groceries. He assembled one of the cribs without asking me. He started calling the twins the boys, before Marla had even shown me anything from the doctor confirming it. At a family barbecue when Marla was 7 months pregnant, Felix reached out and touched her stomach before I could. It was quick, but it was not casual. His palm rested there like he had a right. Marla froze for half a second. Then she smiled too hard and said, "They're kicking today." I looked at Felix. He smiled at me like we were sharing a joke. That night, I checked our shared calendar. 2 fertility-related appointments from months earlier were gone. I remembered those dates because Marla had told me they were canceled. On both of those days, Felix had claimed he was out of town. I did what I had been trained to do. I started checking the story. I pulled clinic billing dates. I checked insurance statements. I reviewed bank withdrawals from our emergency fund. I looked at old calendar data synced to Marla's tablet. Piece by piece, the last year rearranged itself. Felix had been near the clinic on days Marla told me appointments were canceled. Marla had withdrawn cash twice before private consultations I never knew existed. Felix had paid a lab invoice with wording so vague it looked designed to be ignored. Then another message preview appeared on the tablet. Felix wrote, "You promised you wouldn't let him put his name on anything until we talked." Marla replied, "I need him calm until we're home." I read that line 6 times. I need him calm. Like I was a dog that might bite if startled. I called a family law attorney that afternoon. His name was Daniel Price. His office was downtown, on the 10th floor of a building that smelled like coffee and printer ink. I sat across from him the next morning with a folder in my lap and told him I needed to know what I could do legally. Daniel listened without changing his expression. When I finished, he said, "Do not threaten anyone. Do not accuse without proof. Do not do anything that gives them a way to make you look unstable. We move clean." That word settled over me. Clean. I had spent years feeling dirty with shame that did not belong to me. Clean sounded like mercy. Earlier that same week, Marla had given birth to twin boys. I was in the hospital room. I held her hand during labor because a part of me was still loyal to the woman I had loved, even while another part of me was already burying her. When the babies were placed on her chest, Marla sobbed. I looked at their faces and felt nothing at first. That scared me. Then I realized it was not emptiness. It was shock, moving slower than pain. Marla kept looking past me toward the door. I turned once. Felix was standing in the hallway, right outside the room. Not in the waiting area with everyone else. Right there. His face was bright with pride. He looked like a man waiting for someone to move aside so he could enter his own life. I looked back at Marla. She would not meet my eyes. Because the twins had arrived early and Marla was recovering from complications, the hospital kept all three of them for several extra days. That gave me enough time to follow Daniel's instructions without rushing, without shouting, and without giving Marla or Felix a chance to turn my pain into their defense. Daniel helped me take the proper legal steps for paternity testing. I followed every instruction. I kept every message. I preserved every record. I made sure nothing I used could be dismissed as a mistake made in anger. The first legal result proved what mattered most. I was not the father. Felix's name came from the messages, the clinic trail, the timing, and later, from testing his own attorney, could not avoid. On the 6th day after the birth, I sat in my car outside Daniel's office and read the report until the words stopped moving. Probability of paternity, 0. There it was. 10 years of hope, reduced to one clean number. I expected to fall apart, maybe scream, maybe punch the steering wheel. Instead, my body went still in that deep way it had in the nursery. I printed the result. I added the screenshots. I added the billing records, the missing appointments, the messages, the cash withdrawals. Then I signed the divorce papers. Marla was due to come home from the hospital the next morning. I went back to our house that evening and walked through each room slowly. The kitchen where I had made her tea after every failed test. The hallway where I had waited outside the bathroom. The bedroom where she had cried into my chest while already reaching for my brother. Then I went into the nursery. I placed one envelope on the dresser beside the old tablet. Inside were the divorce filing, the paternity result, copies of Felix's messages, and a short handwritten note. You gave me answers. I'm giving you consequences. I packed one suitcase. Before I left, I stood in the doorway of that nursery for a long moment. The two cribs looked innocent. That almost broke me more than the betrayal. Those boys had done nothing wrong. But they were not mine. And I refused to become the soft place where everyone else hid their choices. Marla called me 27 times after she found the envelope. Felix called twice. I answered neither. By evening, Vivienne called once. I did not answer her either, but I listened to the voicemail. Her voice was controlled, but strained. Adrian, Marla is very upset. Whatever happened, please don't make any final decisions while emotions are high. I almost laughed. Emotions had been high for 10 years. That was how they got away with it. The next message came from Marla. How could you abandon newborns? I stared at that sentence for a long time. Then I forwarded it to Daniel. He replied, Do not respond. So I didn't. That silence did more damage than any speech I could have given. Marla did what I expected. She decided I was being cruel. She decided if she could get to her mother first, Vivienne would help her turn the story into something softer. Felix drove her there because Felix always needed to stand close to whatever lie was being told. I did not know exactly what would happen at Vivienne's house, but I had sent one email before Marla arrived. It was short. Vivienne, I know Felix has been taking money from you. I know he fathered Marla's children. Whatever you're hiding, decide whether Marla hears it from you or from him. I had found the payments 2 nights earlier. Cashier's checks. Transfers. Strange little memos that said, quote, consulting. Even though Vivienne had no business with Felix, the amounts were large enough to matter and spaced out enough to look like someone was buying silence in installments. I did not know what the silence was. I only knew it had a price. Later, Vivienne told me what happened when Marla walked into her house with the twins. Marla came in first, holding one baby. Felix followed behind her with the other. Vivienne was standing near the hallway mirror, dressed like she had been expecting company but not disaster. At first, she smiled. Then she looked at Felix. Then she looked at the babies. The smile left her face so quickly, Marla noticed. Mom? Marla asked. What's wrong? Vivienne said she could not answer at first. Her eyes kept moving from Felix to the twins and back again. The past had walked into her house carrying a child in each arm. Then she whispered, "Wait, he never told you." Felix's voice changed. "Vivienne, don't." Marla turned toward him slowly. "Never told me what?" Vivienne told me the room felt airless. One baby started fussing. Felix bounced him once, too hard, then stopped when Marla glared at him. Marla looked at her mother. "Mom, what is he talking about?" Vivienne sat down like her legs had stopped trusting her. Then she told the truth she had buried for almost 4 decades. When Vivienne was 17 before she married Marla's father, she had a baby boy in secret. Her family was strict. The boy's father disappeared. Vivienne was scared, ashamed, and alone. She gave the baby up through a private adoption. She went on with her life. She married. She had Marla years later. She told herself the past was sealed. But the past found her. 6 years earlier, Felix had shown up at her door. He had found adoption records. He knew she was his biological mother. He also knew he had been adopted into the Bell family, which made him Adrian's brother by law, but not by blood. Vivienne said Felix cried the first time he came. He told her he wanted answers. Then he wanted money. Then he wanted access. Vivienne paid him because she panicked. Felix promised he would never tell Marla. "I thought he wanted money and attention," Vivienne said. "I never thought he would go near my daughter like that. By the time I understood what he had done, the babies were already here." Marla kept shaking her head as Vivienne spoke. "No," she said. "Felix is Adrian's brother." Vivienne's voice broke. "By adoption." Marla looked at Felix. He did not deny it. Vivienne said the words that ended whatever fantasy Marla had built. "He is your brother, too." The room went silent. Biologically, Felix was Marla's half-brother. Marla had not known. Felix had known before he got close to her, before the secret calls, before the clinic visits, before the twins. That was the part that made Vivienne sick. Felix tried to speak. "I didn't know how to tell you," he said. Vivienne snapped then. She told me she had never spoken to him like that before. "You knew before the first time you touched her." Marla slapped him once. I know that sounds dramatic, but Vivienne said it was not the kind of slap people cheer for. It was small, broken, almost desperate, like Marla's body moved before her mind could catch up. Felix started crying. He said Vivienne abandoned him. He said Adrian always got everything. He said Marla understood him in a way nobody else did. Every sentence made him smaller. Vivienne stood and took the baby from his arms. Felix begged her not to tell anyone outside the room. Vivienne looked at him and said, "I protected one secret before. Look what it became." That was when she called me. I was in a rented apartment 20 minutes away, sitting at a small table with my case file open in front of me. When my phone rang and I saw Vivienne's name, I already knew. I answered. For a few seconds, all I heard was her breathing. Then she said, "Adrian, you were right. There was more." I closed my eyes. A person can be right and still feel destroyed by the answer. That night, Marla came to my apartment. I saw her through the peephole before she knocked. She stood under the hallway light, with one baby carrier at her feet and one in her hand. Her hair was loose. Her face was bare. She looked nothing like the polished woman who used to cry beautifully in waiting rooms. I opened the door but did not step aside. She looked at me and said, "I didn't know." Her voice sounded raw. I believed her. That was the worst part. I believed she had not known the deepest secret. So I said, "About Felix, maybe. About betraying me, you knew." She flinched like I had raised my hand. "I was broken," she whispered. "He was there when I felt like you couldn't understand." I looked at the baby carrier by her feet. "For 10 years, I held you every time a test was negative." "I know. I paid for the treatments." "I know. I built that nursery." Her mouth trembled. "Adrian, please." I shook my head. "You didn't know every secret, Marla." But you knew. My brother was not my marriage counselor. You knew those boys were not mine. You knew I was preparing bottles and folding blankets for children you had already taken from me. She started crying then. There was a time when that sound would have pulled me across any room. That night, it reached me and stopped at the surface. Marla tried to explain that Felix had manipulated her. He told her I would never understand. He told her I was too controlled, too cold, too proud to admit I could not give her the family she wanted. Maybe he did say all of that. Maybe he found every weak place in her heart and pressed until she confused pressure with love. But she still opened the door. You can hate Felix, I said. You should, but you don't get to hide inside what he did and pretend you did nothing. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. What am I supposed to do now? I looked at the twins. One of them was sleeping with his tiny fist against his cheek. You take care of them, I said, and you tell the truth to the people who need to know it. But you don't ask me to stand inside this with you. Adrian, they're innocent. I know they are. That's why I'm not angry at them. Then why can't you? Because being innocent doesn't make them mine. She had no answer for that. I stepped back and reached for the door. For 1 second, Marla looked like she thought I might still change my mind. Like the version of me who always held her after every disappointment would return if she cried long enough. But that man had been buried in the nursery. I said, "Goodbye, Marla." Then I closed the door gently. The divorce moved forward. There was no dramatic courtroom scene. No shouting in front of a judge. No public post where I exposed everyone for strangers to pick apart. Daniel submitted what mattered. The paternity result, the messages, the financial records, the proof of the affair, the evidence that I had acted cleanly from the moment I knew. Felix lost the most, which was almost poetic, because Felix had spent his whole life believing consequences were things other people handled for him. Vivienne cut him off financially. The Bell family stopped protecting him the way they always had. Marla refused to let him near the twins, without legal boundaries in place. Felix tried to blame everyone. He blamed Vivienne for giving him away. He blamed Marla for needing comfort. He blamed me for being too perfect, too steady, too easy to resent. The more he talked, the more people understood why I had stayed quiet. Marla moved back into Vivienne's house with the boys, but she did not return as the wronged daughter she expected to be. She returned as a woman, living inside the consequences of the choice she thought would finally make her happy. I did not ask for the house. I did not fight over furniture. I took what was mine, signed what needed to be signed, and let the rest become part of a life I no longer wanted. The last time I saw Marla during the divorce process, she looked tired in a way makeup could not hide. She said, "Do you ever miss who we were?" I thought about that. Then I said, "I miss who I thought we were." That was the final, honest thing I gave her. When the divorce was done, I went back to the house one last time while it was empty. The nursery door was open. The cribs were gone. The name plaques had been taken down. On the wall, I could still see 2 lighter rectangles where they had hung. I stood there for a while. For 10 years, I had begged life to give me a child. I had thought fatherhood was the missing piece that would prove my life meant something. But standing in that empty room, I finally understood that the wrong family can cost you more than being alone ever could. I lost the future I wanted. But I also lost the lie that had been eating me alive. For 10 years, I begged life to give me a child. In the end, life gave me the truth instead. And as brutal as it was, the truth was the only thing in that house that ever really belonged to me. I used to think the worst pain was waiting for a family that never came. But the real pain was realizing I had been building one with people who were already taking it from me. Marla gave me silence. Felix gave me betrayal. Vivienne gave me the missing piece. And walking away gave me the only thing none of them could fake: peace. If you made it this far, tell me what you think Adrian should have done when Marla came to his door. Should he have heard her out longer, or was closing that door the only choice left? Leave your thoughts below, and subscribe for more stories where the truth does what anger never could.